Hello everyone, the content we are learning today is trade terms and international conventions related to trade terms. Trade terms, also known as price conditions, refer to the use of a short concept or three-letter abbreviation to explain the price composition of goods related to the handover process of goods, the division of costs, risks, and responsibilities mainly manifested in determining the delivery location, determining the risk transfer point, determining the cost division point, clarifying the burden of import and export, customs, clearance procedures and fees, and clarifying the responsibility of providing relevant documents. It is an important component of the unit price of goods in international trade. The use of trade terms in international trade is not only beneficial for both buyers and sellers to simplify transaction procedures, shorten negotiation time, save transaction costs, but also for both parties to calculate prices and costs. In addition, when resolving disputes between both parties, it is also possible to handle them by citing general interpretations of relevant trade terms, which is beneficial for resolving trade disputes in the practice of international trade. Due to differences in legal systems, trade practices, and customs among countries, there are differences in the understanding and operation of various trade terms internationally, which can easily lead to trade disputes. In order to avoid differences and disputes in the interpretation of trade terms among countries, some international organizations and business groups have made unified interpretations and regulations on certain trade terms, among which the following three have a significant impact. First, the Warsaw-Oxford Rules of 1932. Second, the 1990 revised definition of United States foreign trade. Third, international rules for the interpretation of trade terms. The 1932 Warsaw-Oxford Rules are a detailed interpretation of the cost, insurance, and freight (CIF) conditions established by the International Law Association. Currently, it is rarely adopted internationally. The 1990 revised definition of United States foreign trade was developed by several business groups in the United States and was later revised twice, in 1941 and 1990. Having a significant impact on countries in the Americas, this convention includes 6 trade terms. First, VXW factory delivery. Second, FOB delivery on the transportation vehicle. Third, FAS deliveries at the site of the transportation vehicle. Fourth, CFR cost plus freight. Fifth, CIF cost plus insurance and freight. Sixth, delivery at DEQ destination port terminal. Among them, there are 6 interpretations of FOB, which refers to delivery on the transportation vehicle. First, delivery on designated domestic transportation vehicles at the designated place of origin in country. Second, delivery shall be made on the designated domestic transportation vehicle at the designated place of origin in country, and the freight shall be paid to the designated export location. Third, delivery on designated domestic transportation vehicles at the designated place of origin in country, deducting the freight to the designated export location. Fourth, delivery on designated domestic transportation vehicles at the designated export locations. Fifth, delivery on board at designated loading port. Sixth, delivery to designated domestic location in the importing country on the transportation vehicle, the international rules for the interpretation of trade terms, hereinafter referred to as Incoterms, is currently the most widely and universally used trade term convention in international trade. It was established by the International Chamber of Commerce in 1936, mainly describing the process of delivering goods from the seller to the buyer, involved in the responsibilities, costs, and risks. To meet the needs of the development of international trade practices, the International Chamber of Commerce has revised and supplemented this principle multiple times. The 2010 General Rules, according to the different obligations of the seller, divide the 11 trade terms into the following two groups, as shown in the figure. The 2020 General Rules compared with the 2010 General Rules, the number of trade terms has not changed and remains at 11. The only difference is that the DAT of Group D has been changed to DPC, delivery after destination unloading, as shown in the figure. Third, characteristics of the 2020 General Rules. First, the division of obligations between the buyer and the seller. The 2020 General Rules, based on the 2010 version, further clarify the responsibilities of both buyer and sellers. Both the 2020 General Rules and the 2010 General Rules specify the applications of the seller and the buyer in columns A and B, respectively, but the content and order have been adjusted in the 2020 General Rules. The cost allocation clauses are listed in column A9 and B9 of each term in the 2010 General Rules, while the cost allocation clauses are listed in column A6 and B6 of each term. In addition to the change in numbering, the 2020 General Rules column A9 and B9 uniform list of the 2010 General Rules, the cost items scattered in different clauses. Second, in the 2020 General Rules, FCA, DAP, DPU, and DDP allow the seller or buyer to use their own transportation vehicles, but in the 2010 General Rules and the previous versions, it is assumed that the transportation of goods by both parties is carried by a third party. Third, the 2020 General Rules upgrade in the 2010 General Rules the instructions for use to user annotations, which clarify in the 2020 General Rules of each term about the basic principles, precautions, possible problems in actual business, and handling measures of these. It's beneficial for both parties to choose trade terms more accurately and quickly, and provide specific solutions for contract execution. Fifth, issues to be noted when using international trade practices. The international conventions on trade terms are formed by international organizations or authoritative institutions. Non-term international trade practice, customary practice formed in summarizing, complying, and interpreting, and they are not laws in themselves. However, in the following situations, international conventions have legal binding force. First, when both trading parties agree to adopt a certain convention to constrain the transaction and make clear provisions in the contract, it becomes mandatory when there is a conflict between the provisions of the contract and international conventions. The provisions of the contract shall prevail. Second, when national laws have clear provisions, they are binding on the parties involved. Although international conventions are not laws, they play an important complementary role to the law. According to the laws of our country, when there are no provisions in the laws of the People's Republic of China, international conventions can be used. Third, the United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sales of Goods stipulated that customary practices that are not excluded from contracts frequently used and repeatedly observed by people. People already know all apply to contracts due to the frequent revision of international conventions. When the buyer and the seller agree to adopt a certain international convention in the contract, the virgin year of the adopted international convention should be clearly stated in the contract. Please complete the following post-class tasks. That's all for this lesson. See you next time.